Wow.
Okay, so that imagine from the oldest son, my tío Juan, that began to work in vineyards in 1978, to my youngest uncle of the 10, there was an 8-year period where some family members did not see each other.
That's incredible. Which is a common story a lot for our people.
A lot of labor, but I did have to tell you a very special time for that in Napa Valley. And this is in the late 90s.
Right.
That is when in the Napa Valley, you began to see our generation go into tasting rooms.
Right.
And now do the storytelling when,
Right.
And that is definitely a fresh story for tourists, especially the ones that come more from Texas and Florida, where they're out in Napa Valley and they always hear the same story at different wineries. But here's Latinos working in tasting rooms and then they're actually surprised. They're like, wow, you were actually born and raised here? And it's like, yes. And this is what my family does.
Roots that go back.
And this is what my grandparents
Right.
have done. And for them, they're like, wow, like we want to hear more about you. I have a mailing list where it's private clientele, where back then, guess what? Folks are working at home. Sometimes they're on their break or lunch, or they're done work early.
We're doing
remotely.
deliveries.
And guess what? Yeah, well, not only that, I'm calling them and they're just bored out of their mind at home in the pandemic, and I'm catching them at a good time. They're like, yes, tell me about your wines. How have you been? I want to speak with somebody else besides my cat or my family.
Let's take it back to the beginning of things, at least for your story as it's shaped. Your grandparents, braceros, correct?
Correct.
Where from?
Maternal side, Jalisco, and paternal side, Michoacan. The
Wow.
Parra side is Michoacan.
How did they meet?
How did my grandparents meet?
Yeah.
On maternal side, they met working at en una gran hacienda.
Here in the States?
No, in Las Flores, near Tecualtiche, Jalisco.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Paternal side as well, small town which has had quite a bit of growth outside of Morelia. It's in the Parapeo, Michoacan.
Yeah, that's a mouthful.
It sure is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Try to get the white folks to say that.
Oh, yes.
They came here.
And my grandparents met more because of my grandfather going to a different school. And you can say the high school sweetheart story.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they came to this country what year?
On paternal side, my grandfather came to work. He would always save for a clothing store that he had in the Parapeo. But he did not want to stay here living in general. He always had the goal to just come work through Bracero, go back and be an entrepreneur, start a company. On maternal side, that is a very long years of the hard work and dedication. So again, Bracero, they were lucky that some states were integrated with citizenship program. And so in California, lots of opportunities. But with my grandparents traveling back and forth to save up enough money for the visas to bring the entire family of 10 children.
Wow.
Okay, so that imagine from the oldest son, my tío Juan, that began to work in vineyards in 1978, to my youngest uncle of the 10, there was an 8-year period where some family members did not see each other.
That's incredible. Which is a common story a lot for our people. 1978, you mentioned your uncle, but what was your grandfather doing?
My grandfather?
Yeah.
My abuelito Manuel, he worked initially for Behringer.
Oh, wow.
Yes. He had a long career with Behringer and eventually worked for a vineyard management company as well.
These roots go back.
No, the roots, the roots go way deep. Well, even before Napa Valley, just to let you know, at a high school, his first trip through Bracero was actually in Texas, where it actually benefited him at 18 years of age and 19. He was already getting training for heavy machine. They were clearing land in Texas where the government was building homes for the soldiers returning from World War II.
Wow.
So imagine, for him benefiting of using heavy equipment, which later it helped him out in his career, where he was clearing land and developing vineyards for all these pristine vineyards in Napa Valley. And there's so many shared stories of the raza growing up in Napa, where now it's great to see folks of my age. I'm 47, proud to say that. And now to see friends with their own brand and working their tail off like myself, where they have a daytime job and, they're doing this for their passion in general. But for us to hear the stories of great uncles and grandparents when they work side by side at wineries, because the Napa Valley being such a small community.
You grew up in Napa Valley?
Born and raised, Santa Elena, St. Helena.
So let me ask you, do you consider yourself more Oregonian, more Californian?
I got that Bay Area mentality. Yeah, mentally, I'm still in the Bay Area.
Really?
In general. Yeah, I don't know what is in that water, just that hustle in us.
Right.
Where you come to Oregon and nothing against with Latino community here in general that are in this business, but I feel that they were a bit more timid, shy, where somebody comes out of California with such a drive in the hustle, where in general, you can see my product through the state of Oregon.
Why do you think that is?
I feel more for myself is the mentality and the attitude of si se puede.
Right.
Again, my family
goes back to the roots of
my family coming from that era, where I don't need no fancy terms of certain associations out here in Oregon giving fancy terms to campesinos.
Right.
I come from that cloth.
What were you doing when you were a kid?
Childhood?
Yeah. Because your story goes back. I should probably preface that. Your story goes back to you spending time in those fields with your family, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the earliest side pocket change gigs was La Soca, the time of suckering. That is around the spring break time, where we would just take the bus to Calistoga and we would get gigs suckering, and they were the owner just paying us in cash, knowing that we just had a hot minute finding some work to do. So that was just a week's worth. But away from that, no, in the summer, there would have been opportunities to go into vineyard management, but there was the resources more in St. Helena. My mom being single, a way to keep me out of trouble was definitely the lineage of what was accessible in town. Like, for example, one of my summer jobs right before my junior year as well, after school's over, was working at the Boys and Girls Club.
Doing?
Basketball training.
I thought you were going to say showing the kids how to do wine. I didn't.
No,
There's so many layers to your story, because there was one point where my brother was like, "Yo, did you know that Sam Parra used to rap?" And I was like, "No, he didn't." So you did basketball and wow, that's cool.
Yeah, well, even out of high school, I actually had a big interest in social work and law enforcement.
Right.
And actually, I just began a job at the end of February where I'm actually the community relations officer, bilingual, for a credit union.
Right.
So imagine,
which one?
I'm going Heritage Grove Credit Union in Salem. So I'm the person going to the resource fairs. And now it's great to see so many institutions like Western Oregon University, Linfield, Chemeketa, Oregon State University, where they're about to reach near 20% Latino enrollment is their goal, but they're getting grant money on the federal level, which benefits resources for the Latino community. And that's when I come in with my employer, promoting such things as I-10 lending. So I go from promoting one company and mentality of, financial well-being and in general and financial beginnings. And I go from another mentality of obviously marketing this adult beverage here.
I don't think people understand, when I go back to talking about your layers, it's not just in your timeline, in your history, but rather the fact that most people, when they think of a winemaker, they imagine they wake up early in the morning, they walk out on their patio, they overlook the grapes in their valley or hills, whatever.
Yeah.
And then they get people to work, and that's not at all what your life is like. You got hustles. Yeah. You got, this thing, which is doing incredibly well. I don't want to go too far into it yet because I still want to go back. It hasn't come easy.
No.
When was the day that you decided, because I'm assuming, and I don't want to assume too much, but there was a period where you were like, I want to get away from this stuff, to seeing your family grinding every day, doing all the things. What did you want to do before wine?
In general, again, out of high school, where I was attending Santa Rosa College, I did have the interest in social work and law enforcement.
Really?
But eventually, near 21 of age, I was working at a gourmet store in my hometown. And then a friend of mine returned from Santa Barbara, and they were getting busy with special events at a winery they worked at. And my friend was the owner's daughter of a winery. And then so I began to work some events at the winery, and eventually there was just better pay in general doing that than the gourmet grocery store that I had to work since out of high school, basically. And that's when I dove in right into wine in general with special events and tasting room. So it started out with a lot of polishing glasses, setting up tables, setting up chairs. In general, it's still a lot of, mano de obra
Right.
in general.
A lot of labor.
A lot of labor. But I did have to tell you a very special time for that in Napa Valley. And this is in the late 90s.
Right.
That is when in the Napa Valley, you began to see our generation go into tasting rooms.
Right.
And now do the storytelling when.
Right.
And that is definitely a fresh story for tourists, especially the ones that come more from Texas and Florida, where they're out in Napa Valley and they always hear the same story at different wineries. But here's Latinos working in tasting rooms, and then they're actually surprised. They're like, "Wow, you were actually born and raised here?" And it's like, "Yes." And this is what my family does.
To go back,
and this is what my grandparents
Right.
have done. And for them, they're like, "Wow, like we want to hear more about you."
That's incredible.
Yeah.
You mentioned your hometown. What is your hometown?
It's Santa Elena.
Santa Elena.
Saint Helena.
Saint Helena, yeah.
Majority of tourists that go to Napa
Right.
call it Saint Helena.
Right.
And we always joke, Helena's in Montana. The H is silent because it's actually called Santa Elena. It's actually a Spaniard town.
Correct. Yes.
The Catholic Church was built by Spaniards.
One of the settlements.
The buildings itself from downtown St. Helena,
Yeah.
one of the buildings. Imagine, buildings going back to the mid 1850s.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah.
You got a lot of old grapes there then.
We actually have old vines in that whole area because when Prohibition came around, the only grants on a federal level that majority of them that went for sacramental wine for the folks, attending good mass and
Right.
enjoying good wine, the ones that were granted was church wine. So imagine for all these beautiful old vines you see in California mainly,
Yeah.
still, some have survived, some are diseased and kind of struggling, but you can taste these amazing wines from wines going to at least the 1880s,
That's incredible.
right?
Yeah. I feel like we could do a whole chapter on that, just on the history of it and how we ended up in this side of the America.
Book me a flight. Let's go then.
Let's do it. We'll start wherever they ended up. We'll start in Veracruz, follow that trail.
Right.
Now you're 21. You decide, I think I'm going to do this,
Yes.
but you still, what is it, I guess, that brings you to Oregon? Because there was an origin story.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. So the first winery that I worked for, they founded a winery in the Dundee Hills out here. So my first visit at 21, imagine being 21 and getting into the first time at a Cessna, small little plane from Napa Valley, a private airport,
Right.
to another private little airport of McMinnville. Okay. And going to downtown to where there's only two wineries, one actual operating winery of Panther Creek, and one tasting room downtown that the label is no longer around. And now look at downtown.
Right.
I can think of 3-block radius right now in downtown where there's 8 tasting rooms around now, and all the fine restaurants. Yeah.
Do you remember your first job there?
Yeah, it was the same thing at 21, setting up tables, setting up chairs.
Wow.
Up in the Dundee Hills.
It was just you, or it was just a few?
Oh no, they brought the team. The owner brought the special events manager, and then they brought the special events team with them. And again, for the owner of the winery, I mean, I grew up with a daughter. I mean, for himself, I think he wanted for some folks from Napa experience Oregon, and I worked events already directly for that winery in Napa, and so they brought the special events team basically to help out. What was more popular back then was Memorial Day and Thanksgiving weekend open houses.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was it about Oregon that you looked around and you said, I think I'm going to stick around?
that actually did not cross our minds until later, when through my wife's side of the family, they began to move out here. And then for ourselves, working really hard in California, but just the rat race, chasing our tail, that could have been partially our fault, with the fine dining and just, living a good life where we just didn't seem to save and see ourselves buying a home, at least in such expensive areas like Sonoma and Napa.
Right.
We would have to relocate to other parts in California where even folks that think it's affordable, not so much as other states. And so we made the move out here, and this has been a great move where we've seen our gains.
How long have you been in Oregon?
Summer of 2016.
Oh, wow. That's pretty recent.
So imagine for, summer of 2016, and then buying our house by November of 2017. And then 2 years later, I started this. And then I feel more recently, like our vehicles are very new in a way where, again, we've seen our gains, and we work hard, but you get to see, everything that we've accomplished.
There's two stories here.
Yes.
In 2016 or 2018 when you started.
Yeah.
Sam Parra, the winemaker, and then Sam Parra, the private citizen. And somehow you make both of them work, right?
Yeah.
What were you doing at that point when you started making wine for your own label? You said, "I'm going to do this." I mean, I'm sure you thought about this a lot. For a long time, right?
What was I doing for a daytime job?
Yeah.
In general, I worked directly for a winery.
Okay.
Yeah. Marketing and sales. You see, with my background, it's always been marketing and sales. Even though I'm 47 and did start working at 21 at wineries, I've had jobs in between more sales related. So I think that's always been driven in me, either for distribution of wine or sales related for, I actually had a really fun job, was a promotional company. Actually, what you see here, embroidery, screen print. So you can imagine with promotional companies for a sales point, for a sales mentality, I can walk to any business. I can walk to Republica and tell you, "Hey, do you need a cover for your menu? Do you need a logo on that apron?
Right.
Do you need a logo on your pen?"
Right.
But those restaurants and wineries were my fun accounts, right? But the big accounts in that business, schools and hospitals.
Right. Schools buy a lot of uniforms.
And
hospitals buy a lot of uniforms.
Everybody's got the stitching, right?
Right.
And everything else that's involved around it. A lot of folks don't think about all the notepads, all the paper. That's all involved again with that trade that I had, where again I've always had that sales mentality in general. So.
It makes such a difference to be front facing at one point in your life. And I feel like for a part of my life, I very much had that. So I've seen what impact it's had on my life since. Yeah. People think that, and again, I'm trying not to skip forward, but people think that you got here, one day you decided, "I'm going to start this thing," and then somebody said, "Oh, this is good wine, I'm going to write about it." It's not like that. It's a hustle.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So what was that hustle like for you? When did you? You must have had a plan.
I do want to tell you in general how key networking is in general. Mm-hmm. I happened to meet a wine blogger visiting Napa Valley.
I know this story.
I happen to be a senior wine educator at this winery, okay? And she got in a group with a really large distributor, and again, not to drop names of companies, a really large distributor from Texas. And here's this young blogger. At that point, it's her own personal page, okay? And for myself, growing up again in a small town where the upbringing is, do not burn your bridges. You're in a small community. Be careful. And I think it just has an upbringing in general of how my family is in general. Humble beginnings, hard workers, where I was answering the questions to everybody as equals. Here's this big distribution company, but yet I was getting a question from this wine blogger, and everything was do my job and answer the questions, right? And I had this job for a reason, because again, knowing the farming side, knowing winemaking from making wine with friends and family in Napa Valley growing up. So they know I can answer questions on all departments. She happened to come back on Sunday and gifted me these boxes, and especially the ones that I pointed out that my wife enjoys. And she said the worst experience she had in Napa Valley was meeting the folks that had moved from out of state, working the tasting rooms in Napa Valley. And I believe she might have been in the same experience where they were paying more attention to either the big wholesale accounts or distributors and not really taking and cutting her short on her responses of her questions, where she said, have you noticed that? And for us, and I told her, for us in Napa Valley, we see that all the time. People don't get how Napa Valley was really a farm country town until the late 80s, where the real estate boom really kicked in. But let's face it, we were in a farm area. Well, at that point, LinkedIn was around. I was always into LinkedIn as a matter of being proactive and networking and connecting with like-minded individuals. Mm. Well, let's just say this, the friend that she ended up bringing back to thank me, they just wanted to sit and relax, and her friend to meet me. She happened to be a blogger.
You were just pouring wine.
I was just pouring wine. Well, again, she was on a tour with me in general, but they came back, and that Sunday, I happened to be done with my tour and lunch break. And again, she asked for me. They did come to the break room. I was just about done with lunch, and I came back, and again, she gifted me this, introduced me to her friend. I'm like, hey, how funny. I'm back on the floor, about to relieve my coworker, and I sat in with her friend, and we spoke in general, and they were just enjoying the tasting. Well, here's years later, okay? In general, that was in 2009 or so.
It's almost 10 years.
Okay,
later.
Talk about, again, the relationships out there in general. One of them is one of the main contributors for Forbes.
Correct.
The other is one of the main contributors for Wine Enthusiasts.
Yeah.
So I believe it's just more the timing of releasing the wines and reaching out to, at this point, their friends and saying, hey, I'm about to release my wines. If you happen to have any articles that you're thinking about, please keep me in mind in general. And I feel the big moment was the ideas that I had for 2020. In general, I released previously in spring my some wines, but my red coming out at that point, actually the one I brought today, this Tempranillo, and in general, and at that point, it's nice to see some orders coming out from the other parts of the U.S. from readers that, don't get me wrong, I don't get flooded, but any opportunity for myself on a podcast, any opportunity for media, for myself not being able to afford PR, I'm all in.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things. If you're a small brand, seek out the people that have written about people like yourself, or have told the stories of people like yourself, right? That's such an important thing. I think the industry as it is very competitive just to have just for them to notice you and notice your story. Right. So, again, we can have a whole chapter on that. Yeah. But you launched this thing 2018.
Yeah. In general, even just to save for the funding alone, where I had one common day off with my wife, and on Tuesday, I began to work at a producer because he came by the winery in the Dundee Hills. He happened to be entertaining from folks out of state, and he had a brand in McMinnville, and he invited me to go bottle. Mm-hmm. And this was not even a truck. This is a standalone bottling line. And I thought I was going to be going there to actually be getting paid with wine. And at the end of the day, it was cash and wine. And then he invited me back. Like, he gave me the announcement like a month later that he told me the dates, for bottling. And at that point, I'm like, well, this is extra work away from my employer. I better ask. And I asked my employer, hey, could I work on my day off on Tuesday because of a competitive clause? And they said, well, it cannot be marketing or sales related. I'm like, oh, no, it's labor. It's bottling. They're like, you want to go bottle like trucks? And I'm like, yeah. They're like, yeah, go for it. And so it started from quickly that spring of 2017. It went from 3 wineries. Mm-hmm. You bottle mainly in February, May, and then some is done right after harvest. Well, right after harvest in 2017, it grew to 7 wineries that November. From those winemakers giving me a contact number, here, call this person. And at one point, I was bottling for about a dozen wineries. Wow. My Tuesday gig was labor, was go work extra, or even for my employer at the time, just save my tip money.
Right.
And there I was 2 years later, financially ready to start at a very small scale. And from there, just growing little by little.
What do you tell yourself? Because I've experienced this very much, right? Like, what do you tell yourself when you're going in on your days off, knowing that you're already tired as it is, but you're going in there anyway?
Yeah.
Because you see something.
Right.
What was it that you were telling yourself to stay motivated to do it?
I feel for at that point, seeing opening an actual business account and mentality, thinking like, yeah, I can do this. At that point, I've seen again talk about the financial gain, but at that point, meeting all the winemakers is that you're there with your with your community. Mm-hmm. You're talking to other winemakers. You're bottling the wine, but you're talking about their wine and the techniques they use. And guess what? They're involved with some growers, some contracts that I'm in touch with as well to this day. So you're making a lot of contacts in the business when you're doing that. And it's something that I love, something that I enjoy. I mean, I'm sorry, it's something that I did out of high school, away from working at that gourmet store.
Right.
Sometimes there were gigs to go bottle at wineries. We would go do that because we were trying to save money. For back then, it was just a party and go on spring break to Rosarito or Tijuana. Plain and simple back then, right?
Right. It's a different time.
Gigs for to spend your money on something else.
That's a hustle.
It sure is, yeah. I think that's just always been part of both sides of my family. It's just it's been many family members being workaholics.
Do you think that's a cultural thing for people, or is it just a very specific?
I feel I feel for the workaholics when it's tied in with a passion.
Right.
I don't think it's really being a workaholic.
Correct. Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah, it's just a lifestyle.
Right. Right. To me, it's just
like
so common.
with me, it's just send me. I just get up in the morning. And even the other morning, I was up way before the alarm, where I was already. I don't think it affected my sleep, but I already had the checklist of what was going to be taking place that day.
Your life's changed quite a bit in the last 4 years. Well, everybody's life considering the pandemic and everything that's happened. But you launched this product right before the pandemic,
right? And that's why, again, with that big article that came out, why I drew the attention of Forbes magazine was for myself. My background for sales, right, was to pick up the phone, and mainly from contacts in California, which, see, for my brand, I have a mailing list where it's private clientele, where back then, guess what? Folks are working at home. Sometimes they're on their break or lunch, or they're done work early.
We're doing deliveries.
And guess what? Yeah, well, not only that, I'm calling them and they're just bored out of their mind at home in the pandemic, and I'm catching them at a good time. They're like, yes, tell me about your wines. How have you been? I want to speak with somebody else besides my cat or my family.
How many people do you think were actually doing that at that point?
How many calls was that?
No. How many people were taking that same strategy that you were?
Probably very few.
Probably very few.
For Oregon, I think many folks are sleeping way too much. Where again, for myself, that Bay Area hustle, man, in me, where pick up the phone, people,
right,
talk about them, and I think for them, knowing more from business ties or even some friendships. Hey, how have you been? What's going on? And for myself, I'm like, all right, let me tell you about this. What's going on? But also, be respectful. And obviously, you're catching up with some being beyond just clients, some being friends, and truly catching up with them. But of course, there's a sale.
There's a half a case or a case.
In a mix. Exactly.
Right.
And so imagine for that, you can still drop off wine to a shipping company, or contacts that I've made right before the pandemic happened out here. I can still make the doorstep delivery, right? Like I'm not going to call.
I did that hustle.
Yeah, exactly. But I feel in general, phone sales, being really interactive on getting my Instagram page going in general. And I think they highlighted in general, just again, maintaining relationships in general over time was a big highlight. I think for Forbes magazine, even though when they talk about food and wine, or other industries, there's always got to be the tie-in of business and tie-in with Forbes. Obviously, their magazine of business and finances.
So let me ask you about that.
Yeah,
you have this article piece printed. It definitely has an effect in not just your life, in your sales. Did at any point you have the feeling of imposter syndrome?
Not at all.
You felt
Not at all, because because I feel from other professionals reading these stories where it's a snowball effect, where one writer knows them and say, "Hey, can you introduce me to him?" Mm-hmm. Because I think they were on the same page. How you said I think there's different layers here. When you're bringing up, bracero, it's like, yes, my grandfather was a part of that. Yes, my grandfather was there, in la línea con César Chávez.
Right.
In general, where I feel that has just been really beneficial, where it's just not another story of winemakers saying, come on in, check out the view of my 20 acres planted, let me talk to you why you should pay an arm and a leg for this wine.
Right.
And when then asking, hey, what did you do before? Oh, I happened to be selling my pharmaceutical company for $30 million back in Minnesota, but we're living at the dream out here now of wine. Hey, but that is the joke in the wine industry. You might have heard this already. How do you make $1 million in the wine industry? Is that you better start out with 5 or 10 million.
There is so many stories like that where you're like, so you're the winemaker? Like, no, the winemaker's actually just this person that we bring in.
This person that's really well known.
You're right. You're like,
actually well known as a winemaker.
Which is fine. I think that, it's, I understand that because if you're making shoes, you're not the shoemaker. Mm-hmm. You might be the person that said, hey, I like the swoosh there versus the other side.
Right.
Right. And there's a market to that, but I don't think people truly understand, one, as a people, we're underfunded, we're under resourced and under mentored.
Right.
And it takes so long to get to scale up to that point when those things start to just show up at your door. When somebody says, hey, I want to write about you, or somebody says, hey, let me know if you need help with this thing. Yeah. That has more to do with your own hustle and you being able to survive that length of time to be in business long enough, right? For you now, you've seen that growth. You've seen growth in the last 4 years. Right. No, I don't want to talk about the next step. Let's go back. Let's keep going back to this shit. Let's go back to when you first had your sale, your big sale that you said, okay, I think this is real now.
All right.
Because you sold bottles to your friends and family and all that, but where was the big sale, your biggest sale?
The big sale, my first big sale was California Wine Club.
Wow.
Yes. When they put in an order where it's 2 different wines and you see a big old pallet leaving the warehouse, and the payment is a little different in California, where I get the check way later, but it comes through right on harvest.
Right.
In general. But even in general too, I feel even for, not just the big sales part, but everything that you put in your company. But I do want to actually, also talk about how Oregon having so many more accessible programs out here. I will tell you from my logo, a P logo, Parra meaning vine.
Right.
The 3 ridges on the roots. I'm the 3rd generation in the wine business. But I feel with the story and the branding that really touched the person at the Small Business Development Center in Chemeketa and Salem, they connected me to the law center where they were actually helping companies. They trademarked my logo, by the way. Something that would have cost me about
$6,000 to $8,000, right?
A lot of money. Only cost me the 3 checks that I actually pay to the USPTO was $350.
Right.
All the work is put in by the students. All the work is overseen by the lawyers, the instructors. I mean, talk about, getting a break right from the beginning when you're starting out.
That has to do with the fact that people want to help you.
Well, even 2 organizations like Latino Founders.
Right.
I was at Pitch Latino. And then you have the Portland Metropolitan Chamber, the Hispanic Chamber.
Somebody was watching there.
Right from the beginning, I got grants for my website for a CPA.
Right.
And that was because of funding of 2020.
Right.
Helping out businesses. And then even more recently, last year during Hispanic Heritage Month, Naked Wines. Here's this big international company from England where the grand winner got $25,000. A great winemaker, Latino winemaker, Impostor Syndrome. But guess what? 3 of us received $10,000.
I don't think people understand how far $10,000 will take you when you're a small business owner like this, right? Most people, even with this, tell us the story with it.
This was a $10,000. This was qualified.
Can I see it?
Yes, I actually I saw the advertisement on LinkedIn, by the way, going back to LinkedIn. I saw the advertisement for Naked Wines, and I've heard the name of the winemaker from Napa, okay? And I said, wow, they're giving out like scholarships for students. But I clicked on it and I was reading and I kept going, reading the article, and I'm like, wait, I'm within the years of a company. And so they were looking for folks to apply.
Right.
And I just made the deadline. But the plain and simple, they said, what is different about your Latino brand versus, well, the very few that are out in the US? And myself, I already began to can wine and doing my research. One company, a Latino of Mexican origin in New York, beat me by 6 months on canning wine.
You could have been the first.
I could have been the first, but I'm the second domestic Latino brand in the US to can wines. But I am the first Latino brand in the US. I own a formula. This is a wine formula right here. This is a Tempranillo-based wine, but when you're infusing wine, you gotta report that. You're dealing with a really, really highly regulated product here, as you know. This is infused with té de canela, cinnamon tea, and hibiscus, Jamaica. So of course, what speaks greater in culture, Latino and Mexicano and Mexican, of agua frescas, Jamaica. This is 11% alcohol, but the great benefit of this, I always say, tómalo frío. You drink it on ice. I blend 20% sparkling water. That brings down the alcohol volume and the calories. Talk about things that are trending, right?
Right.
So when somebody like Naked sees this, is like, yeah, this guy's gonna make.
He's onto something. Even as you say that, I'm like, this motherfucker's selling a product right now. But that's okay. I like it. I like it. Go into that, because my question to you now is, you now have this product.
Yes.
You have the other product, but there's you do such a good job, in my opinion, of differentiating the two brands. It's still your brand,
right?
But you're saying, look, we're going into canned wine because, one, there's a need for it. Two, there's not enough of us doing it. And three, I already have the resources to do this, and I'm not going to let it go to waste, right? Most people would not touch that. They would be like, no, we only focus on this. We don't do that. You found a balance in all that. And I think that's such a key skill, where you're like, you still focus on the quality.
Right.
And you're still focusing on like what people are drinking. So what is next?
Next for myself?
Next for,
In general, I have been speaking with my uncles. They have a label in Napa Valley, and we've always talk over the years to make the homage wine to Manuel Martinez.
Wow.
A joint venture in general. And so that is next for Parra Wine Co. I mean,
so for the people that
keep with loved ones, right?
For the people that don't know the background story to this.
Oh, for my uncle's label? Yeah. So two of my uncles, Jerry and Gonzalo Martinez, they have Vinos Unidos. They have two partners in LA that are, they've always been family. These are long time friends, and they're doing really well in LA with a high Latino population. And even though my uncles they're busy, one does construction, but one is an assistant winemaker at a winery, and he happens to be making his own wines under the same roof. But they're still in the position where they're buying grapes, like myself. We still have to buy grapes in general. But again, for themselves, they have partners in the mix. They have this beautiful restored barn in Carneros area of Napa Valley to do events.
Wow.
So they're in a good position versus for smaller brands. I feel sometimes even kind of posting a little too much on social media, like, times are so hard, or we're doing this sale, where again, I knew in general to make that shift in the demographics going to cans. Luckily, I found a place where I physically had to take the wine there and can it. And there are even two situations where I went back and labeled the cans myself with their little machine to save money. But it's great to find these companies that you can do canning on a small scale.
Right.
And another growing category, infused wine. So this one, for example, this is a white port. Mix it with ice and pineapple juice. Make a wine cocktail pina colada. I call it a Parra colada. But that is the category that's growing, right? I feel when this category is not going so well, guess what? You better open up your eyes and see what is selling out there.
Right.
And I always like to say, I make my passion wines, but yes, I have branched out into others of what makes sense out in the market. Sometimes you just can't stick to just saying, oh, I'm going to produce the same old boring rosé every single year.
Right.
I'm going to throw the same event every single year. Oh yeah, I'm doing a Dia de los Muertos. I'm painting my face. It's like, that's great to embrace a culture.
Cinco de Muertos, as I like to call it.
Cinco de Muertos, yeah. But I think sometimes where it's pimping the culture
so
too much, where it's like, no, for me, I'm saying this, I'm submitting a label to the government saying Vino Chingon. Or on the Chingon side, they're like, hey, what does that mean? Of course, I keep it PC when I'm submitting the label and I say, oh, that means really good. But in reality, it means badass. It's like, yes, my shirt says this is a badass wine.
Right. That's beautiful, man.
I
still have so many questions. I feel like we should walk away on that, but I'm not. We're going to keep talking about it. For me, Postre Lujoso, it's one of the most important things. I don't know if you know this, but when we launched Republica, our mission was just to try to level the playing field as much as we could. So we focused on BIPOC winemakers and women and LGBTQ plus folk. And, when we would bring people in and tell them what this required, they were like, well, no, you don't have that. You don't have enough quality to really, for what you guys are trying to do. And I was like, well, it's good talking to you. Moving on, right?
Yes.
When we started shaping the tasting menu, we're like, we need to finish it off with the story. And that story was so important to us. We know Postre Lujoso it's a wine that you made for your grandmother.
My great aunt.
Great aunt.
Yeah.
Right. So share that story, please.
Of course. So a great aunt of mine, very sensitive to alcohol. But for some reason, the dessert wines, especially the late harvest wines in Napa Valley, were settled well in her. And an uncle of mine happened to be transitioning from a vineyard management company to a really high-end winery where he's brought this dessert wine before. Well, now he gets it a whole lot more. And so now you have this wine year round. And my great aunt, may she rest in peace, she's listening to the story, and that's when she began to sip on the dessert wines and noticing that it's selling well in her body. And again, my uncle's going more into depth, and all of a sudden, this is back again, the late 90s, saying that this little half bottle was $75, $60 back then. And, here comes my aunt's scrawny little skinny arm flying out of nowhere, because we were all gathering, because it's a little skinny bottle for a big old family. Right. It's like, you better get your glass close to that bottle. And again, here comes my aunt's little scrawny little arm sticking out of her, and she's like, hey, dame más antes que se acabe. Like, give me a little more before it's all gone. And us knowing, we're like, yeah, hook her up. Like, she's the light drinker of the whole family in general. And she's like, dame más de ese postre lujoso. So give me more of that. Postre lujoso could be luxurious or fancy wine. And I'm like, I didn't want. And so we always joked around with that. Hey, traje el postre lujoso. Yeah, the fancy dessert. We always brought the fancy dessert.
That's incredible. I think for us, I mentioned that story because I think it's important of being seen and being able to tell that story, right? Representation, because there's not a lot of us here. And I hope this doesn't piss off anybody, so I'll try to say this politely as possible. You see, you heard the example and you heard people describe us as like lobsters in a bucket, right? Where as we see one getting out, the other one pulls it down.
Right.
And there's so much of that happening when in reality, there's so much space for everybody.
Right.
But your own hustle, your own, your bravado, I guess, in many ways, the way that you go out there and talk about it with pride, it's known to rub people the wrong way within our own community, right? Because you're hustling too much, or you're like,
well, actually, even from the young community, them knowing, my daytime job and doing this and doing all the great contracts and doing everything, where even a few winemakers were the ones that actually call me Chingon.
Right.
And that's what crossed my mind. I'm like, wait, that's actually really funny for a wine label because they call me Chingon. And then in general, I can say this, I took claim of the #1 Latino-owned wine brand in Oregon. And guess what? Nobody's challenging that. They can't.
Right.
And it's lonely at the top, my friend.
Yeah.
But you did mention, again, the example of lobsters in the bucket. But it's great to find the community of like-minded individuals and folks that want to support you, as we were introduced by good friends of ours.
Yeah.
And for myself, being in your shelf space from day one.
Yeah.
Us taking a photo, masked up.
Yeah.
And then there's
November 2020.
only one of my bottle, the Alvareño, and the Postre Rojo came soon.
Correct.
But the Alvareño being on that shelf, where your shelf was actually halfway empty still when I delivered to you. And I had to thank you for that in general. I mean, for your company.
Yeah.
And for the caliber of your company, for my wine to be there since day one, I had to thank you. And I think for your end, consistently, Miguel and the team and yourself staying in touch, and my hustle to reach the follow through, right? I deliver samples, and it's always the follow through and say, hey, come on, show a brother a little love. What do you want to restock this time? You always have you have to finish a sale, right?
It is very much it. I think for us, you came in early on. We were barely launching. Yeah. We had an idea of who we wanted to be and what we wanted to do, but it wasn't quite what it is now, right? Yeah. Now, you after all the accolades, to be able to still have this available in every establishment, Lilia, Republica, the Noche, even a Comala, right? Yeah. Like it's an option there. So for us, there's great pride in that, and being able to tell that story or continue that story. Why do you think there's so much competition within our own community?
Because their mentality is in line with the wine community in general. We're all in competition. We're all an alcoholic beverage competing out there with everybody else. Just like in beer, just like in spirits, where you can see the ones that go out there with promotions and what they do different, how they're in different markets. It is again paying attention to that market and separating yourself from other brands in general. Where yes, my cans are at tap rooms, breweries, taquerias, but my single vineyard wines that are at Molnova Athletic Club, they're with you. They were with Octa, which suddenly closed. Yeah, but there's a difference, right? And they're actually going to be for the first time, a Latino brand domestic here in Oregon has been sold at Timberline Lodge.
Wow. You happen to be that person.
And I happen to be that brand.
So,
but no, plain and simple. I don't think it's personal. But I think it's just more of the sales cutthroat side of the business.
Right.
Even though they don't talk about it, it's there.
You now proven you're here, and there's a lot of people that hopefully will watch this. Yeah. That'll feel that inspiration to say, hey, this dude seems like a very approachable guy. He's not one of these big industry snobs. Yeah. Can they reach out to you and say, hey, I have questions about this stuff? Is there...
Absolutely.
You have the space for that?
Oh, yeah. Okay. I've always connected Latino brands. One being in Dayton, that I connected them with a wine bar in West Salem. My buddy out in Hood River, I've connected him with some gigs in Portland. I provide his phone number. When I have gigs come up, actually... I did speak with him. Definitely want a big shout out to Adrian Cornejo of Nueva Ventura. Is the only brand I will bring up today, because for him, his family came through Bracero, and they've been farming and in the hustle in Hood River. And here's Adrian Cornejo coming out from Hood River, where he is the only Latino brand out on that side of Oregon. Wow. Yeah.
I don't think people truly understand yet the importance. I recently started reading Revenge of the Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell's follow-up to his book. But I've been talking about this a lot because he goes into the example of the 30% rule, right? Where like how to tip an entire, you name it, from the way that communities are built, where if it goes over 30% Latinos or 30% African American, that whole community will eventually tip, right? And I feel like it's the same thing that happens in boardrooms when you have women in these boardrooms that one is not enough. You need three. One Latino is not enough. You need three. It's the same thing with product, right? For us, to be able to see that with restaurants, there wasn't that many that were trying to do what we now do, right? Which is, I hate to use high-end dining or anything like that or upscale. It's just food with intentionality. With you, it's yourself, and you're at the top right now. there's something so important about making it more familiar to people, that saying, this is not an exception. This is just the way that the industry is going. We need more Samparras in the world out there.
Yeah.
And it's so important to tell that story. And this is why I was excited to be able to do this today. But also, before I ask you one last question,
Yeah.
I want you to take us in your express way of explaining how, people are going to think that you're out there with your winery, with your forklift in the morning, that, you're doing all these things out of your house or out of your own vineyard, if you want to call it that, right?
Yeah.
For the ignorant people like myself. That's not it. Talk about that hustle and how much